Greetings viewers, Eric the Car Guy. Thanks for tuning in today. I'd like to introduce you to my new to me 2000 Honda Civic that's behind me that I picked up from Indianapolis, Indiana at the Pull Apart location there. Thanks Pull Apart. Got a lot of friends at Pull Apart. In fact, Bree is a new friend. Bree is the one that handled the paperwork and took care of everything to get me this car. This is her here. She made the entire experience totally awesome. So thank you, Bree. And thank you, Pull Apart. Why do I have this car? Well, let's talk about that. Now, this car may look familiar to some of you. In fact, it's virtually identical to the 1999 Civic that I had in here, the green one, that I did all that work to. Well, after I finished all that work, I ended up giving the car to my oldest son. Now, apparently, one of the heater hoses in the back here sprung a leak and leaked out all the coolant. And in the process, my son severely overheated the engine. So much so that it apparently melted the new water pump that I just installed, and apparently he and some friends installed a new water pump, put it back together, and got it running. It still has some overheating problems and some other issues ever since then. In fact, I went up to see him and removed the thermostat from the housing, and I found literally it looked like gravel, like a giant rock was stuck in there. There was chunks of something that should not be in a cooling system in there. At that point, I said to myself, you know what? I don't think this engine is worth fixing. I think we need to find a replacement. Hence the reason we're here now. Well, in addition to the engine problems that he's having, he said also when it's cold, he had difficulty with the transmission shifting. And I don't know if you remember that green car had a transmission fluid leak, which might have caused some damage to it. So here we have a 2000 Honda Civic with an engine and transmission. That's the entire reason I got this car. Thank you, Pull Apart. Except I went to pick it up and, well, I found out it's only running on 3 cylinders. In fact, the engine barely runs. And I checked the oil, and I'm sure you can see there's no oil on that dipstick. I'm not encouraged by what I see here, and I'm not sure if I can use this engine. If nothing else, I can use this transmission and perhaps some other parts on this car. Perhaps the car has another purpose, but know that it has a salvage title on it now. So if you're saying to yourself, Eric, why don't you just fix this car up and swap it out for his? I don't want to go through the trouble with the salvage title. I don't want to go through the trouble of, bringing him another car, any of that stuff. It's going to get this engine and transmission. If this ends up being a giant, boat anchor when I'm done with it, it does. But I don't think it will. I don't think it will. I think there's some use in this yet. But number one, we need to find out if this engine is going to be any good for me to put into my son's car. Well, let's get started on that. You might have already noticed that I have a battery charger on this car, and I left it on overnight, and it's almost all the way charged up. I don't really care about the battery in this car. I don't care about testing it or anything like that. I just want to be able to crank the engine because it could barely crank before. So I'm happy to see that this is most of the way charged up. The first thing I'm going to do is start it up and do what's called a power balance test. I'm going to cancel out each one of the cylinders by pulling the spark plugs one at a time to see if I can find out which cylinder has the problem here. All right, what I'm looking for is for the RPMs to drop when I pull the spark plug wires one at a time. If the RPM drops, that cylinder is working. If the RPM does not drop, that cylinder is not working. I haven't even touched you yet. All right, that cylinder's working. That one's working. Well, maybe. Yeah, it's working. That one is not. Cylinder 3. Cylinder 4. This engine may be running on less cylinders than I thought. It looks like 1 or 2 are working. 3 and 4, however, are not. Now that leads me to suspect the possibility. Oh, there's some, look like coolant came out. So it's full of coolant, and that's a good sign. I didn't see white smoke coming out or anything like that, but that could mean a head gasket issue or something. Next step, I'm going to pull the plugs and inspect them. I should point out that there's also an odor of fuel, which says to me that it's not burning. There isn't complete combustion going on. And maybe just a quick look at the wires. What I'm looking for here is like maybe any oil contamination that I might see, and I don't see any, and that could indicate that there's a problem with the seal in the valve cover here, but I'm not seeing any evidence of that. So let's pull those plugs. Plugs are a window into the combustion chamber. They could tell us a lot. black, and that's a pretty massive gap. So these plugs have been in there a while. They're the correct plugs, but that one certainly gives the appearance of running rich. Next one, number 2, more of the same. A very old spark plug. Lots of black sooty stuff on the outside, which would indicate like unburned fuel, rich condition. This guy here, same thing, but could that be some oil contamination that's also in there? This is one of the cylinders that wasn't working, but looking at the spark plug, that's a massive gap, and that electrode is worn way down. It really could just be that this spark plug is junk. Wouldn't that be like awesome? Ha! This is one of the best looking plugs there is. It's cleaner than the rest. It doesn't look nearly as sooty. You can sort of see maybe the difference between those two. But again, I mean, I'm seeing super old plugs, like super old plugs. If one of these was super clean, I could say that it could be a head gasket, because whenever water gets into the combustion chamber, it tends to clean things up nicely. I'm not seeing that here. I'm gonna pull the distributor cap off next and get a look inside of there, because it kind of looks like this thing hasn't had a tune-up in forever, and it could just be like a bad distributor cap, believe it or not. Now what I'm looking for in here is like maybe evidence of what's called carbon tracking. And that could be some that I'm looking at there at the base of where the coil comes in. So the coil sends the voltage to here, which is then distributed to each one of the cylinders. Now, each one of these looks like, well, the cap hasn't been replaced in a while. I'm encouraged because it looks like a Honda cap. I like seeing Honda ignition parts here. But that little bit there off of where the coil comes in possibly could be our culprit. I think what I'm going to do next is a compression test. Just took the air filter housing off just to see what things look like here. I don't see anything other than the fact that it got rolled over when it was installed. We're looking at here the top of the starter solenoid, and there's the battery connection coming in, and this connection that's next to it is for the starter solenoid. So when you turn the key, it sends 12 volts to this connection. All right, so I disconnected it. So where it went in, right here, I'm going to install a wire. All you really need is a wire, and I have just the wire. I used to have a longer one of these that went all the way up to the battery, but since I don't, it's okay. But I like this because it has the same type of end on it that the regular solenoid connection is, and I could plug it right in. Now the bare wire, I'm going to connect to my little starter here, and I'm going to connect this to the battery, and every time you pull the trigger, you close the circuit, and basically you activate the starter, so I can turn it over so I can do the compression test. And there's a look at everything hooked up. You don't need this fancy trigger tool. All you need is a wire running from that to the positive, and all you got to do is just touch it on the positive, and that'll get the engine to crank over. And the reason I want to do it this way is because this way it doesn't activate the ignition or the fuel injection, so I'm not adding fuel to the cylinders, and I don't have to worry about spark going through the ignition coil with no place for it to go. Now, all I'm doing with this particular compression test is seeing if the engine is working, like checking all the cylinders, making sure they can produce compression. If they're within 10% of each other, that's great. I'm not concerned about a wet test or a dry test. That's just telling me the condition of the piston rings and everything. I don't care about that. I just care that all the cylinders are working at this point. So that's the only purpose of this. And pull the trigger and take a reading. Looks like about 95-ish on that one. Okay, that's compression. I like seeing compression, and that goes along with what we've seen so far. Let's see what cylinder 2 has to offer. About 95, 100. So a little bit better, but within range of the first one. Actually, even better. This one's up around 110, somewhere around in there. So also good compression. And here's the big question. If we got good compression on this one, we know that pretty much we probably just need a set of spark plugs and cap and rotor for this. There it is. Like I said, that's what I was looking for. When I'm doing a compression test like this, and I know I have an engine miss, especially severe like this one was, I'm just looking for the problem cylinder, and I found it. Now, let's take it one step further. Now I'm going to guess that this thing has a burned up exhaust valve, meaning that the exhaust valve is cracked, damaged in some way, and causing the compression to come out. Now I can kind of confirm this with this compression tester, but I need to modify it real quick. Now you see down in there, there is a Schrader valve, just like on a tire. I'm going to remove that valve. I'm going to use a tire tool to pull this out. Comes out just like that. So it's just like a tire valve. This is a Craftsman compression gauge, by the way. Now I'll screw the adapter back on. The next step is to put the cylinder that you'll be working in at top dead center. And I think I got lucky. Now that's cylinder number 4. Here's the distributor cap. This one right here is the wire for cylinder number 4, which it would have to be on compression stroke for that to be in that location. But check out the rotor. It is virtually in the exact right position that it needs to be in. So I don't think I have to do anything. I'm just gonna run some compressed air into it and see what happens. The worst that can happen when I hook compressed air up to this, which is what I'm doing, I'm basically performing a quick and dirty leak down test. The worst that can happen is the engine turns over. So what? I bring it back up into position and we try again. But what I'm looking for is where the compression is escaping. This is, in essence, a quick and dirty leak down test. If it's a bad exhaust valve or a burned up exhaust valve, as I suspect, I can go back by the tailpipe and listen there. And if I hear that's where the air is escaping, I can reasonably conclude it's an exhaust valve. Also, if it's an intake valve, I can go back here and listen. In the intake, I can open up this throttle plate, which I did not do during the compression test. I was just looking for a major problem. So that was just a quick compression test. We found our problem. So normally you'd block the throttle plate open. But anyway, if it's leaking past the rings and there's a problem at the bottom end, which I really, really hope there isn't, you can take the oil cap off and listen for the air escaping in here. If you hear it escaping in here, then you know it's going into the bottom end, and that's really not cool. And speaking of which, let me get a light, but it doesn't look too bad down in there. There you go. I don't see a bunch of like blackened, coked up stuff. And what I mean by that is it's just like this, the oil gets cooked on all the metal parts. I don't see that here. Anyway, let's run some compressed air to the cylinder, see what we got. That's not cool. I do hear it coming out of here. Sort of hear it coming out the intake too. Let's go listen by the tailpipe.
I don't really hear anything back here. So I think I busted on my theory.
Looks like the cylinder head's coming off. I'm not going to cover this in detail, but basically the exhaust manifold / catalytic converter's got to come off. What I do with the intake is there's a brace underneath held down by 2 12 millimeters. I'll unhook the brace in the back of the block, unhook everything on the intake manifold, but then just push the intake manifold back towards the firewall. The timing belt, I won't do anything on the bottom end. I'll just loosen the tensioner and slip it off the top pulley, and I'll be able to remove the cylinder head that way. It cranks, but it's got no compression. I don't get it. All right, well, I removed the cylinder head. It didn't take too long. It took a little less than an hour to do without the filming stuff. Okay, watch how cylinder 4 doesn't move. Now we know why the rust is in there. So this engine is junk. I don't see any point in trying to fix this. That cylinder is a dead hole. How this thing even ran is a total mystery. Usually when this happens, the connecting rod goes through the block, so my replacement engine is no good. Like I said, if it was in the top end, I wouldn't be too worried about it, but since it's in the bottom end, well, there is oil in it. Although I checked the oil sticker. This car has like 130,000 miles on it, and the oil sticker says that the oil shouldn't have been changed at like 115. Maybe we found the source of the problem. So I was thinking, man, I would have got this got this oil draining before I went to lunch. This does not look stock. Don't open your mouth when you do this. Pieces! Ooh. That thing is so done. I was optimistic, perhaps too optimistic. So this is what's left of one of the connecting rods. I don't know what that used to be. Perhaps more connecting rod. But these little bits are, well, they shouldn't be here. Now let's go see what happened to the engine side. It is ugly with a capital U. So, like, I'm seeing damage to the journal on the crank, I'm seeing damage to the cage, and more importantly, let me see if I can get you up in there. So you see where that connecting rod's laying in there? That's where the piston comes down, the piston skirt. So that piston is now wedged in there because of that. So this failure is catastrophic. This block is junk, this crank is junk, this engine, junk. All junk. And we have another piece on the pickup here. Oh, but that's it. Oh, there's some stuff in here too, and also in the pickup. It's probably starving the rest of the engine for oil. Yeah, we're not saving this. Well, that's the end of that engine. Like I said, I had hope. I'm gonna put the oil pan back on so it doesn't drip everywhere. Cylinder head might be good, but you could see those chunks that were in the oil pickup probably starved the entire engine for oil. So everything that moves inside that engine was subject to, well, excessive wear due to oil starvation. Not the engine I want to use. Wah, wah, wah. Thanks, pull apart. Nah, just kidding. Still got the rest of the car, which could be usable. It's just got a dead engine. The transmission might be good, which I also need. I just need to figure out an engine now. D16Y7, as I believe what this thing is. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the introduction to my 2000 Honda Civic. The rest of the car doesn't look bad. There's just that body damage. And like I said, it only has about 130-some thousand miles on the chassis. So there's something usable there, but it's got a salvage title. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this diagnosis of a salvage yard engine. And well, this is how you find a blown up engine. Just start with a cylinder balance test, work your way to a compression test, then a leak down, and away you go from there. But everything I see here explains everything I saw. And normally when this happens, there's usually more than just a dent in the oil pan. There's usually like chunks that fly out, or maybe even chunks missing from the side of the block. And it's fairly obvious that you have a catastrophic engine failure. So this one was kind of sneaky. And it ran. I drove it. I drove it like this. Do you believe that? Anyway, if you have automotive questions not covered in this video, ericthecarguy.com. I'll link that in the description along with additional videos, things like that you might be interested in. So check the description for additional information, including a link to Pull Apart, which I'd like to thank them very much. Anyway, thanks again for watching. Be safe, have fun, stay dirty. I'll see you next time.